We're going to go ahead and get started. So please take your seat, grab your coffee, and we're into the home stretch, and we've definitely saved the best for last. Good afternoon. For those of you just joining us, I'm Janet Camarina, Director for the Foundation Center San Francisco office. Again, welcome or welcome back to today's open house programming, a full day of free programming designed to inspire and support your fundraising planning by helping to connect you to and to learn from industry insiders sharing their secrets. And just a reminder to tweet about your experience here today at hashtag FCSF Open House. That stands for Foundation Center San Francisco, then Open House spelled out. In terms of the day's agenda, basically, Lisa, I hate to break this to you, but you're the only thing standing between these folks and happy hour. No pressure. But don't forget, this is the first time we're doing a happy hour, so I just want to remind folks that we hope you'll join us for our first...
This is the pre-happy hour.
There you go. The first post-open house happy hour at Lefty O'Doul's. So if you want to continue to enjoy mixing and mingling, Lefty O'Doul's is nearby in Union Square at 333 Geary Street, and they have extended their happy hour drink pricing for us, so join us. Special nonprofit rates. For those of you coming here for well, actually, out of curiosity, how many of you have been here since morning? Wow, you guys deserve a prize, and you know you can get one after this event. We have the treasure hunt upstairs, which will familiarize you with the resources in the library. Everybody who takes a form and completes it correctly will win. We have a prize pupil right here demonstrating I'm not making this up. So we're upstairs in suite 606, 6th floor, and the treasure hunt is designed to familiarize you with both our online opals, which are our online tools for research, and our print pearls, because believe it or not, there's still a lot of information in print that's not yet online. So by doing the treasure hunt, you'll kind of uncover the nooks and crannies of various hidden treasures in the library. And for how many of you are here for the first time, out of curiosity? Great. Our plan is working. So for those of you that raised your hands, the Foundation Center's mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the U.S. and worldwide. The reason we do the open house is a reminder to those of you who are regular users but maybe haven't visited us in a while, and those of you who did raise your hand who are new, that every day is an open house at the Foundation Center. We don't charge for admission. There is no membership fee required. And so really take advantage of the fact that we are a gift from foundations and corporations to help you in your quest for sustaining the good work you do with your nonprofit organizations. So along those lines, if you want to learn more about us, check out a lot of our free resources at www.grantspace.org, as well as at our main site, foundationcenter.org. At GrantSpace, in addition to tools and resources, you'll find videos, and we're actually streaming Lisa's program this afternoon for people who can't be here in person to learn from her wisdom. And so if after today you realize, wow, I wish my board chair were here, there will be a recording of Lisa's program that you can share, and all of those recordings are either linked from our GrantSpace page or on the Foundation Center's YouTube channel. So be sure you've given us your email, because we usually send out an announcement once the recording is posted that we can share with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the program. And next up, we have Surf's Up, moving from the board you have to the board you need. And our speaker is Lisa Hoffman. I've had the pleasure of working with Lisa on our Foundation Center San Francisco board for many years. She's currently our chair, and she's been instrumental in helping us both with program development and direct participation at events like this one. How many of you have worked with Lisa? Because I know she has some fans, okay? So can talk to those people to learn about her beyond the bio. But she brings more than 25 years. Oh, don't read mine. Okay. Then what I can tell you, because I know she hates it when I read her bio, besides the fact that she brings 25 years of experience, she also brings a lot of humor and grace to touchy situations, which is great for some of the board transitions we'll be talking about during this conversation. She is also a Zen priestess, which I think helps with some of the grounding and that's needed when dealing with certain situations on boards that I know, and boards on which I've worked with her, that's been that grace she brings and that meditative practice really can help in tough situations. So again, this is Surf's Up. We're talking about transitions, which can be touchy. So please help me in welcoming our surf guru, Lisa Hoffman.
Thanks, Janet. It's true. I was ordained at San Francisco Zen Center in 2008, and some of the groups I work with when we're in the contracting phase, they asked me, could you put in a clause about enlightening our board chair? Of course, since I'm a board chair, I figure I can get away with a joke like that. So I'm glad you're here, and there's actually 6 people with us now. So far. And I want to find out a little bit more about who's here, and then we'll jump right into our session. So how many of you are board chairs? How many of you are former board chairs? How many of you are board members? And how many of you are executive directors, consultants, wealthy donors? Because we'll talk to you after the program. And I also just want to quickly get a sense of the size of your organizations. So how many of you are with organizations where your budget is, let's say, $250,000 or less? Okay. Any 100,000 or less? Okay. How about around 500,000? Okay. How about $1 million to 2.5? All right. How about 2.501 to 5? Anyone 5 or more? Okay. One other question. How many of you are with organizations that are 5 years or less old? How about around 10, between 6 and 10 years? 10 and 20, or 11 and 20? Okay. 21 and 30? 31 and 50? Older than 50? Let's see, 75. Okay. Well, I just want to say you are among my favorite people. I love working with nonprofit people. I love hanging out with nonprofit people. Feel really, really lucky to do what I do for work, and I'm glad we'll be spending till happy hour together. So what I want to do is I hope you'll leave with a couple of things today. One is a framework for looking at your board, for evaluating where it is and where it needs to be, and have some tools and key steps for getting there. As you might imagine, I could give a week-long training on this subject. So what you'll be getting today is an overview, framework, and then steps to take. And then there is, I'm sure you've seen a bibliography on your agenda, because I want to make sure you have resources so that you can dig a little deeper after you leave today. So I'd like to know, just to ask you what you'd like to leave today with. Anyone want to raise their hand and tell me? Yes, Janet.
So,
No context, no story, just what you want to leave with. Sorry, there's a lot of us.
I'd like to lead with tips on how we move from a board to before now has had the option of giving money, and now we've built in a requirement, and how do we accomplish that successfully?
So success with give. I don't like invite, so I say give invite. I mean, I don't like get, so I like to say give invite. A little more gracious. Okay? Yes. of these expectations will be met. We're not going to specifically focus on things like fundraising, but I think you'll have some general ideas. And you are welcome to hang out with me at happy hour and ask me any questions that haven't been answered, probably before the second glass of wine, because who knows what I'll say. So I have two ground rules I'd like to suggest. What do you think this one is, like Las Vegas? Yeah, I hope you'll be honest, because we'll have a better session. Confidentiality is a good thing. And what do you think my ground rule is about devices? I would love for them to be off, not even on vibrate, unless you're using them for this session, because even when they vibrate, it steals your attention. And if you're here, you might as well make the most of it, right? So turn it off. I turned my iPhone off, and I love my iPhone. Okay. So anyone who's been to my workshops knows that I'm not just going to show you a PowerPoint and talk and drone. So I want to have discussion. I want you to feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. And then Ada there is going to be asking questions from our virtual audience. And I won't have time for a lot of questions because there's a lot to get through, but I want to make sure that we have a dialogue, okay? And I would ask you, in thinking about the question that you want to pose, if it's really individual to your organization, why don't you wait till happy hour and let's have questions that everybody is, or a lot of people are going to relate to and gain some insight from. And so I want to tell you what I've been hearing at the office lately. This is executive directors. My board members are calling me, they're calling my staff every day with ideas about our event and our programs, and they seem to expect us to implement every idea that they suggest, and I don't know what to do. And I see heads nodding. I want to make a disclaimer here. Board chairs and board members, I hope you won't feel bashed. We appreciate you. We love you. We very often throw you on the board without much onboarding or orientation or clarifying roles and responsibilities. And, you're going to default to what is familiar without that kind of training and education. So let's have a little fun with what I'm hearing at the office lately. Brainstorming. Oh my God, our board meetings always deteriorate into brainstorming ideas that my staff and I don't have time to implement. Rubber stamping. It just seems like the board just wants to leave. So when an idea is proposed, everyone approves and says, is the meeting over? No ED. I haven't been evaluated in 10 years by my board, and I don't know what to do. And then the board is a little scared of evaluating the ED because they don't know what to do. Now, this doesn't relate to Las Vegas. I want to reassure you there's nothing improper going on. But there are some boards that are very tight, and in between board meetings, they have all kinds of discussions. And so what I hear from the board chair or the ED is, it's really weird. It's like there was a cabal that had already made a decision when this issue and this question was brought up. And I see heads nodding on that one, too. So that's what I've been hearing at the office. And what I want to do for the next little while with this PowerPoint is very frustrating that this doesn't move because I want to be moving all over. Can you hear me? Is this good? Okay, great. So what I want to do...
For our live stream audience.
Our online audience. And I can't even swear because then it'll be online. And I'm from Brooklyn, so that's even more frustrating. Okay. So what I want to do is start with a very fundamental framework for the board's role that I just find over and over, and even with boards that have been around, organizations that have been around for 30 or 40 years, this isn't part of how board members are oriented or trained. And I think it's a very important framework to understand, and causes a lot of the issues I hear about at the office and keep me buying the big packs of Kleenex at Costco for sad executive directors and board chairs. So in your packet, this is on page 2, and I want to thank our colleagues at Compass Point. But this is a way of looking at board leadership and the board's role. That is about service and trust. So the board has its governance role when it comes together as a governing body in board meetings, in committee meetings, and it has a support role where board members are more individual volunteers. And on the governance side, board members are representing the community. The community is entrusting you with making sure that the resources that have been gifted to the organization are used wisely, are used in relationship to the organization's mission, vision, and programs. And so you are representing the community, because if the whole community was in the boardroom, can you imagine how long the meetings would take? And in your support role, you're actually representing the organization and its clients and its mission to the community. You're being ambassadors, you're being fundraisers, and again, you're fulfilling this role as an individual, as a volunteer. So you are representing the community as a formal governance body, and you're representing the organization to the community. You're in a really unique role to do that, because when you're out there talking about your organization and its impact and its strengths, it's a little bit of a different energetic and impression than when staff members are doing it. And we need both out in the community. And so what I see happen quite often is board members aren't quite clear on the difference between the governance and support functions that they fulfill. So running through what they are, it's planning. It's making sure that the organization has a vision for where it's going to be, and strategies and steps for getting there, and the right kind of policies to make sure that the organization functions effectively and with integrity. And of course, finance and legal. You're there to steward the organization's finances. Fund development, we all know about that. On the governance side, you are there to plan, to partner with your development team to make sure that you have a solid plan that's going to get your organization the resources that it needs. And you're monitoring that plan. So you don't sort of let go of the plan on January 30th and then on December 1st find out, oh my gosh, we're behind goal. Again, you're partnering with your staff, you're monitoring your plan, you're popping open the champagne when you reach your goal or exceed your goals, and when you're under goal, you work with the staff to determine what do we need to do differently. Sound management is simply you're making sure your ED and your staff has what it needs to do an excellent job, whether it's money, whether it is support. And then finally, board governance. It's up to you to make sure as a governing body you're being effective, you're following through, you're responding to your board chair's emails. I've been hearing a lot of that lately. Nobody responds to my emails, so I thought I'd throw that in. Evaluating the board on a regular basis annually. So that's on the governance side, and all of these roles and responsibilities have a support embodiment too. So with planning, with finance, some of us have specific skills in those areas, and so you're available as an individual volunteer to your executive director if there are questions or challenges in between board meetings, or that need to be sliced and diced before it's brought to the board. Sometimes the finance committee does that. Sometimes it's your finance chair. And same thing with planning. When a plan is being executed, things come up. And as an individual volunteer, if you have that expertise, you might help your ED problem solve an issue that comes up. When confusion happens, it's when, as an individual volunteer, you think that your advice is actually a governance decision, and you have that expectation with your ED. I see lots of people smiling. So thinking about the governance and support role, when do boards get stuck? What do you think? It's your turn.
When they're sort of between the levels that you described here?
When they're between the levels I described?
Yeah, between small and medium size, kind of grinding the gears, trying to get to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Boards get stuck when they confuse governance and support. And what that looks like is daily calls, directives, we discussed that. The staff fundraises, and we just make policy and have meetings. So that is not recognizing, yes, part of our role is to plan around fundraising, and as supports, as individual volunteers, we raise money, and the staff is actually the boss of us in doing that. We're not the boss of the staff in giving ideas and brainstorming. So when boards confuse their governance and support roles, it's easy on the support side to issue directives, to think a one-on-one meeting with an ED or staff is a governance event. Or on the other side, to turn board meetings into brainstorming sessions and activities like that that are actually more appropriate on a one-to-one basis or in a committee meeting, or when it's identified on the agenda. This item is for brainstorming. Anything else? Any other ideas you have on what it looks like when a board confuses support with governance? Any experience you've had? Yes, Brenda. Yes, that is sort of thinking, well, I'm just an individual volunteer and kind of not owning the governance role that is so profound and important. Any other thoughts about what it looks like when, yes?
When the nonprofit is starting, they don't have staff.
Excuse me?
When the nonprofit is new and they don't have staff, so the board is responsible
Yeah.
for it all.
Oh, you're skipping ahead. So that is what I want to talk about next. And then we're going to put these two kind of frameworks together and then figure out how do you develop your board so that there's clarity and effectiveness, and on the support side, individual board members are rising to the occasion that we need them to. So in the beginning, there's the kitchen table. There are a group of people and a founder around the kitchen table, probably the founder's friends, and they're talking about this great idea for a nonprofit. Maybe it's Project Open Hand, Meals with Love. Maybe it's Bay Area Legal Aid. Let's make sure that poor people have legal services. Maybe it's the San Francisco Botanical Society. Let's make sure that the botanical gardens have the resources they need beyond limited government funds. And so I want to talk a little bit about what the nonprofit looks like at the beginning, and then what the board looks like. So at the beginning, there's not much money. Sometimes there's no money. Tiny staff, sometimes no staff. Very often there's absolutely no staff. And there's little structure. We're family. So everybody does everything. Everybody talks about everything. Decisions are made in a group. No lines of authority, no policies. And then on the board side, so you have this lovely organizing board, and as you might imagine, A following board are basically friends, maybe family members of the founder, and they follow the founder. A leading board is a group of people who start a nonprofit, and so they are in that leadership, visionary, launching things role. And you can imagine what happens when that kind of board hires their first ED. Some of you EDs may have had that experience. And what a board looks like at the kitchen table stage is, as I said, it's small. Usually it's exclusively friends of the founder. It's hands-on. If we think about, on the nonprofit side, tiny or no staff, oftentimes the board is the staff. So the board is doing the programs, making the decisions. The board is everything. And again, it's family, it's informal. Recruitment usually happens over a cup of coffee. Hey, you want to join this great board? Usually no job description. Sometimes people say things like, well, you don't really need to do much work. Just show up at meetings. And it doesn't even matter if you show up at meetings. We just want to support our founder. So that's the kitchen table stage, and I actually don't denigrate it with the jokes I'm making. I think it's amazing what founders do, the founders of nonprofits and founding boards, because to start a nonprofit is a Herculean task. And it's a unique role that the founder and the kitchen table board has. So the next stage is the governance stage. And as you might imagine, on the nonprofit side, there's a growing budget, there's a growing staff. There starts to be some professional management. Hopefully, it's not true of all nonprofits, but there is perhaps, depending on the growth trajectory, there's line staff and there's people who coordinate and manage. And for some nonprofits that grow quite large, there's senior management level, etc. So there's more formal structure. There might even be personnel policies. Can you imagine? And on the board side, it's larger. Hopefully, it's diversifying. It's getting a bit more complicated. The kitchen table becomes the conference table. So hopefully, there is more clarity about the board's role. The board is owning its governance role, so it's not rubber stamping the founder, but actually participating in decision making, in vision, in strategy, really looking at the budget and asking questions other than, why are we spending so much money on copying? So the board is starting to engage in a strategic, leading kind of way in partnership with the executive director. And usually by this time there are committees, because hopefully the board's a little too big to slice and dice everything at every board meeting, because how many people like 5-hour board meetings? So that's the governance stage. So you have the kitchen table board, not much structure, everybody deals with everything. You have your governance stage. I wanted to mention the institutional stage. The vast majority of nonprofits don't reach this stage, and it's not appropriate, but significant budget, millions, sometimes billions, very formal structure, senior leadership, middle managers, and a leadership team, an organizational leadership team. On the board side, I've worked with boards like this. Can you imagine 100 board members? Their role is primarily fundraising, and it's generally the executive committee that governs. Oftentimes there's philanthropic leaders. And so those are the three stages of board development in a very broad way. You have a handout in your packet that goes into it in a little more depth, and there's a wonderful article about this that is listed on your handout. So when do board get stuck? To your point, it's when they stay in the kitchen table stage. And I have to say, I've worked with organizations that are 50 years old, and their board is in a kitchen table stage. And it's when they're between stages. And what is lacking is clarity and intention. So what does this stage look like? Or what does this stuckness look like? Again, brainstorming at meetings because they're thinking they're in the kitchen table stage and we're going to brainstorm great ideas for the founder. And then there's the complicating factor of perhaps not clear on governance and support roles. So when you have that lack of clarity on both of those levels, it can make for a confused board. Rubber stamping. So a board that should be in a governance phase is still in a founding stage or stuck between, and there's still a founder ED. So rubber stamping happens rather than real discussion. And very often, board chairs don't yet know how to craft agendas that support meaningful discussion and decision making. Again, no ED evaluation. I've worked with organizations that have $2 or $3 million budgets and an 18-person board, and the ED isn't evaluated because the kitchen table board never evaluated their ED. The ED was a founder. Everybody was family. They knew how the ED was doing. And when an organization reaches a middle stage, an ED needs that kind of feedback. I would say that a founding ED needs that kind of feedback too, a real thoughtful evaluation. Backroom dealing, again, that is a founding kind of stage way of functioning. And I've worked with many boards, again, that are 30, 40 years old, and the action actually happens between board meetings because they're caught between stages or they're in that kitchen table stage. So how to get moving? What do you guys think? Thinking about what we're just talking about? Yes?
I have a question related to the backroom building.
Okay.
Because you want your board members to be friendly with one another.
Absolutely.
Camaraderie. And how do you help draw that line that doesn't have backroom feeling but still has that camaraderie?
Well, I think it's absolutely fine I think it's great when board members talk to each other and deal with each other between meetings. I think it's great when they talk about the organization's business and the board's business. What doesn't work so well is when there's kind of a shadow board that makes decisions and sort of advocates strongly for how they want things to be. So I think that we're going to get to, in a couple of minutes, how to deal with that in kind of a bigger picture way. But it also requires a approach to board meetings where issues are really discussed and decisions are structured and made thoughtfully and in a real way. So if a decision seems to have been made between board meetings, there is a way to say, let's unpack this discussion and take a fresh look at this decision we need to make. Here's the context. Let's do a round robin and get input. I think for board chairs, round robin discussions are the great levelers and a tool that I work with a lot, because oftentimes what will happen is the loudest voices who are having a de facto board meeting between meetings are the ones who will kind of take over a discussion or a decision-making process. So to simply go around the room, have a time limit, have everybody weigh in, suddenly makes it a fresh decision, not a done deal. Yes?
What's the difference between brainstorming and going around the room and getting the discussion going?
Well, brainstorming is having a list of ideas or ways of approaching things, and a round-robin discussion means you might look at, we're looking at changing our mission. We're looking at adding a new constituency. We're Muttville, and we deal with old dogs, and we're thinking of being Catville and dealing with old cats. So we want to take the temperature of where board members stand on that. You do a round robin, each board member weighs in, and then you at least start with everybody expressing what their position is, and you go from there. So it's actually pretty different. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
You talked about doing assessments of the ED, the board chair, but what about the board members themselves?
We are going to get to,
See, that would be a stymieing point, how to get moving.
we're going to get to that. So the way we get moving is to figure out what is going on in the bigger picture. And that informs what direction, what do we need to develop with our board to move it towards the board we need. And so what I recommend, and again, it's going to be different for different boards, is to have a series of discussions where your board chair, perhaps your executive committee, engages the board at board meetings on looking at what stage of development is the board in. And there's a worksheet at the end of your packet. And I can't tell you how many times I've done this with boards. And boards get really clear on where they are and where they need to be. I mean, usually I show them that one-pager, and they go, oh my God, our organization is middle stage, and we're sitting around the kitchen table talking about what hours our dog clinic, I guess I have Muttville on my mind, is having. That's a staff job. We did that when our organization was founded and there was no staff. That's not our role anymore. So, and you can email me for the electronic versions of these materials to have a discussion where you pass out that one-pager and say to the board, let's be honest, let's have a real discussion. Where are we? Where is our organization? And where are we? And as I said, I have seen boards that are 30 or 40 years old realize that they've never fully reached the governing stage, that they're stuck between kitchen and governing, and they're holding the organization back. So it's that clarity. You know, the Buddha called it enlightenment. You can't develop if you don't know where you are. So that first act of identifying the board stage can be incredibly powerful. And then you want to look at what kind of awareness does your board have around the governance and support roles. And again, if you just use the Compass Point worksheet and provide some context, I over and over see light bulbs go off. And a board member will say, oh my God, I've been calling my ED every day with ideas about our big gala or about, you know, what I think our programs should be focusing on this year, and expecting my ED just to do it. And that is not my job as an individual volunteer. So information really is power. And then the other piece is when it's well facilitated on a board level, board members that might be a little resistant, they like calling the ED every day, they are influenced by board members who are maybe a little more grounded. I believe in the wisdom of the group when it is well facilitated and when a discussion is really designed to be focused on figuring this out. What stage are we in? Are we really clear on our governance role and our support role? Just those two actions really can start change happening fast. And let's see what else I put down here. Oh, develop action steps. So, action steps. You're going to need to have a series of trainings with your board, and depending on what you figure out about where your board is and where it needs to be, that'll inform what training you do. And least you think I'm trying to sell myself as your trainer. There are lots of different ways of getting information and training your board. and we'll talk about that at the end. So you want to do a training on board, support, and governance roles. You want to unpack that developmental stage because you want to take that initial awareness, oh my God, we're stuck between the kitchen table and the governance table, and you want to work with the board to figure out what do we need to do to grow up as a board. Okay, we have a role description. We're still recruiting people over coffee, telling them it's not a lot of work. So we need a really rigorous recruitment process. So you can use the table in here as almost as a beginning checklist for what you need to put into place so that your board grows into its proper stage. Intentional board culture, I think that is not only critical, it is really fun. So you can do a simple exercise where you define what culture is and ask the board, what's our culture now? And similarly with most boards really nail it on the head with what stage they're in or stuck between. I find them pretty honest about what their culture is. Oh my God, our culture is to come to meetings, and that's about it. Our culture is to say, I'll do this, and maybe we do it, maybe we don't. So then you take another chart pad sheet, and you say, what kind of culture do we want? We want a board that shows up. We want a board that follows through. We want a board that is transparent. We want a board that, fundraises. So culture, being clear about your current culture and figuring out what kind of culture you want and the agreements you are going to make as a board will be really obvious. And I have a worksheet for this, and if you're interested in it, email me and I'll email it right back to you. You're welcome to use it. Nonprofit corporate culture. I've been seeing a real trend with people wanting tech folks on their board, and then they get them. And the cultures are so different. And then the poor tech people get dropped onto this board. I'll never forget, I saw this presentation where a board chair, a senior manager in a nonprofit had been developing a particular portal of their website. And he did a presentation to donors. And he said, well, for the first 6 months, I talked to all our stakeholders, and then we generated and brainstormed ideas, and then I talked to more stakeholders. And this one donor with a tech company came up to me and he said, oh my God, my business would have been out of business if we took that long to do our web portal. So very different cultures. And again, same thing with corporations. People get dropped onto the board without just the simple practice of saying, let's look at corporate culture and nonprofit culture and how can they complement each other, and what's going to help us be more effective as a nonprofit, and what's going to help someone with a tech company or a corporate executive adjust to board level decisions that somehow take a while, to lack of resources. A big issue I see is corporate board members who actually have a staff expecting nonprofit staff to act as quickly and implement things as immediately as happens on a corporate level. So I see contentiousness start, I see frustration, and in onboarding and orientation, to simply talk about, educate each other, what's your culture like over there in Google land? Let's talk about the nonprofit culture. Let's talk about how we work together and what can we learn from each other. Otherwise, it's like Mork from Ork, right? They get dropped into slow nonprofit land and everybody gets frustrated. Yes. Oh, there's a few questions. Yes.
Do you find that conversation is best to be led by an outsider, like a consultant such as?
Oh, always. No. I think, to me, it needs to be part of the orientation. And orientations can be so alive and dynamic when you deal with these kinds of issues. when you talk about the board's culture, when you have a discussion, when you have a class of board members who are with corporations, you can just facilitate your board chair or a member of the executive committee who has the skills can facilitate a discussion so that the board members fill in the blanks. And your ED or nonprofit staff who are there can flesh out a little bit more about nonprofit culture. I think it's more powerful if it comes from the actual people who are joining the board and being oriented. And again, I have just seen light bulbs go off. And then, what happens is you do this and then people forget it, and then they do what they do, but you have a reference point. So if you have a board member who is kind of delegating to the ED and treating them like staff, then a member of the executive committee can have a discussion with them and say, remember when we talked about nonprofit corporate culture at the orientation, and then we talked about the board's governance and support role? Let me give you a little bit of feedback about how you're working with our ED. So some people get it and keep it, many people don't, but it becomes a reference point for dealing with sticky situations, always in a supportive way, because most people mean really well, and when they are a little out of tune with their role and how they deal with other board members or staff, it's usually because they don't know. The evil board members will be another workshop. That will be a follow-up. One more question, and then we're going to move on. Yes?
I'm assuming that I ran into a situation where it wasn't a corporate culture, but it was a non-public board member who had been on a board that was 20 years established.
Mm-hmm.
Organization where this one was brand new. So that having them understand the differences between brand new developing organization versus one that's been around for a while, how they operate.
So understanding, I'm just remembering, I have to repeat the questions for our online folks. Understanding, a new board member, understanding the difference between an established board and basically a startup. Orientation, then you set the foundation for dealing. That's going to be really ingrained behavior, and it's really common. And I think it's a matter of communication once you orient board members. And you need, board chairs and executive committees, you need to get comfortable with communicating and educating. And when it's done in a supportive way, most people are well-intentioned, it will be a good conversation. Anything from our online folk?
Not as of right now.
Okay. So we're going to move in. I have one or maybe two other points. Conflict resolution. I see more boards get in trouble, get stuck, because there's differences of opinion. There's upset at a decision that's made without an opportunity to express it, and it becomes a conflict. And what happens? Gets swept under the rug, and does it go away? No. So I can't get into conflict resolution here, but I think training board officers on how to deal with conflicts with other board members is really, really important to do. Conflict really is, I'm from Brooklyn, but I'm going to sound really Californian now. It truly is an opportunity for deeper understanding. All it is a difference of opinion, a difference of values. Quite often it's a misunderstanding. When it gets swept under the rug, it festers. When you stop at the board level or you have a conversation with board members who are in conflict and say, let's unpack this. What's going on here? I get the feeling you don't agree with the decision we made, so let's talk about that. Or there's a values difference here. Let's flesh out what it is, and let's figure out if there's anything we can do, or if you can live with the fact that there's a difference in values. So dealing forthrightly with conflict in terms of moving the board you have to the board you need is really, really important. Boards get stuck. Board members stop coming to meetings when there's conflict that's not addressed and they don't feel heard. So then the next level of your action plan is what I like to call governance housekeeping. And this is where board evaluation would live. So how many of you have job descriptions for your boards? Okay, that's good. Some of you can be proud. Some people are raising their hands like this. A lot of you don't. And that tends to be a kitchen table kind of characteristic. People join the board, everybody does everything. Got to have a job description. It needs to be clear. I think it's helpful to actually frame it in a governance support role. I haven't seen that done too much. But then you use it in recruitment and you start educating potential board members as well as recruiting them. This is what our culture is. This is what the board's role and responsibility is. We support our nonprofit as individual volunteers as well as formally governing. Accountability. Culturally, we're a board that is accountable. So people make commitments. If they go MIA, again, there's a conversation. It's a supportive conversation. It is finding out what the issue is. Some people get on the board and they realize, I just want to brush the old dogs in the kennel at Muttville. I don't want to be on the board. And human nature is we don't deal with that kind of thing when we're embarrassed, so we disappear. So it's great when the vice board chair, I think I've been picking on the board chair enough, calls an MIA board member and says, we noticed we miss you. You haven't been at board meetings. What's going on? Is there an issue? Is there something you need support on? Communication supports accountability. Committees. How many people have committees? How many people hate committees? How many people feel like they need committees but their board isn't big enough? How many people just feel like they need committees, their board is big enough? So effective committees really make a board more productive and can help board meetings stay at a strategic kind of level. So we don't have time to go through what that means and how to build effective committees, but usually when a board is stuck between stages or in the kitchen table stage, they need to either inventory committees, how are they functioning? There are evaluation tools, self-evaluation tools for committees, or create them in the first place. Boardsource.org has a great series on board committees, how to organize them, job descriptions for them. It is fantastic. There's even like a booklet of committees on committees. So they have everything at BoardSource. How many of you have terms and term limits? How many of you enforce them? Okay. So critical part of governance housekeeping, I once started working with a nonprofit that was 35 years old, and several of the board members, how long do you think they'd been on the board? 35 years. One of them headed the science committee, and he would brag that they never had committee meetings. And the board meeting I audited, I thought, oh, they don't have committee meetings because they have it at the board meeting. And then they talk in very arcane scientific terms that the mostly non-scientific board didn't understand, and it was a way of controlling. So auditing your committees, looking at how they're working, creating them, making sure they have a job description too is critical. And part of your board annual evaluation needs to include committees. How are they functioning? Is the agenda putting the right things in front of your committee? Yes?
For the evaluation function of the ED and of the board itself, is that done by
The executive committee generally handles the ED evaluation, yes, and involves the entire board. There is a fantastic ED evaluation tool, and you will find it on blueavocado.org, which is on your bibliography. Jan Masoka, I think, developed the best ED evaluation tool ever. And if you want an electronic version, you have to buy her book. And of course, I can't remember the name. Jen Masoka, Masoaka, was longtime CEO of Compass Point Nonprofit Services. You can get her book. You can just Google it, and her books will come up. And it's a book about nonprofit personnel and policy. And in it, it's everything soup to nuts, from vacation policy to how to lay off employees to giving bonuses. We'll end on the happy note. In terms of the board's self-evaluation, that is generally led by your governance committee or your executive committee. And there should be two components of it, where board members complete a form tool where they evaluate the board as a whole and themselves. And again, if you email me, I have a couple of really good tools, and blueavocado.org has a tool as well that's very good on board evaluation. Recruitment. This is my favorite recruitment story ever. I was talking with this board chair, and I'm sorry, those of you who were in my recruitment workshop last year have heard this story. And he said, I found the best board member. I was on a camping trip, and I told him about this nonprofit that I'm chair of, and he thought it sounded great. So I put him on the board. I just asked him to be on the board. So I said, and did he show up at meetings? And he said, well, no. But he makes a little donation every year. So the kitchen table board generally has an informal approach towards recruitment, no job description. If you need to develop into that governance stage, you need to have a formal recruitment process. You need to reach beyond the people you know. You need to, in Yiddish, you call it the mahers, the yentas. You want to get the nonprofit yentas involved who know everybody and who are going to know some people who are going to love your board. You want to look to your donors. You want to look to your volunteers, not just your friends and family. And you want to have a process that includes an application, an interview, some formality. I think that's enough. Yes? How big should it be? I have an answer. Big enough. What that means is big enough to take care of the board and the organization's business. So you might imagine for a $100,000 organization, the business is simpler than a $10 million organization. If you have a capital campaign going on at your $10 million organization and you're doing strategic planning, you're probably going to need a good-sized board, and you're probably going to need some volunteers to supplement your committees. So I would look at what is the business of the board and the related organizational business, and just in a practical sense, how many people do you need to take care of it? How many committees do you need? And I will put in a plug for short-term working groups. I don't believe in lots of standing committees. I think groups that come together and work on something short-term and then dissolve is a great way to do strategic planning. Don't ever have a program committee. I'm sorry. They cause too much trouble. I want to move us on. So I want to talk. We've touched a bit on how meta issues manifest. So we've talked about at meetings. They may manifest by boards wanting to do staff work, boards wanting to brainstorm, boards wanting to figure out what should the clinic hours be for the puppies. And Muttville didn't do this, but another animal group I worked with did. The board spent an hour and a half. This is a middle stage board of a $7.5 million organization discussing what the clinic hours should be on Saturday. 50 years old, they were still a founding board, still a kitchen table board. So generally, the manifestation of meta issues happens at board meetings and again between board meetings. So I want to give you a few tips on how to deal. Chairs, people who are presenting segments, facilitate discussion to the board's governance role. And all that means is when boards want to get into staff work, when they want to brainstorm, when that's not the purpose of a segment, because you've had your very comprehensive orientation and you have a board agenda that indicates the purpose of the item, Stephen can say, you know, our purpose here isn't to brainstorm, it's to discuss and decide. So we're going to leave the idea generation to the staff and the fundraising committee, and we're going to look at this fundraising plan and approve it, maybe with some suggestions. So knowing what the board's governance role is, noticing when the board slips into a support role, into kind of a staff role, can empower you to just get the meeting back on track. And most people really appreciate it. Facilitate for equal time. So I'm a big extrovert, in case you couldn't tell. I like to say I can shoot from the lip. I always have something to say. And me, without awareness, will overwhelm introverted board members every time. And so it's really important, especially to move out of the small kitchen table stage where everyone could talk easily without structure, without strong facilitation, to level the playing field. Because oftentimes rubber stamping happens and decisions are fait accompli because not everybody weighs in what they really think. So to simply use a few facilitation tools, like if you have a discussion you need to have or a decision you need to make, give board members a moment or two to write down their key thoughts. And then don't just have an open discussion, because I will jump in right away. Have a round robin. Start with your quietest board member where you know they're going to ground the discussion in a really thoughtful and insightful way. And then go around. And if you have people who really go on, give it a time limit. It's just a really simple facilitation tool that can revolutionize and transform board meetings. And then, again, when the board veers into areas that aren't appropriate, that aren't on the agenda, you simply bring them back by saying, I just want to remind us of the purpose of this discussion, of this item. And then I always recommend that you have a parking lot, or I've learned from my organic farmers organization, a quadrant 4. Or for my other environmental group, the bike rack, where you put good ideas. You put those ideas that you have a board member that really wants to talk about it, and you say, we're going to save this for the next board meeting or an appropriate committee. Because people are frustrated if they don't feel heard, and they don't get to hijack the board meeting. And sometimes board leadership needs to follow up outside meetings. If you have board members who are dominating, really insisting on talking. I've worked with boards where there's a lot of nonverbal communication, eye rolling. It's not okay. And for people who are new on the board, for people who are insecure, that will shut them down every time. So I can say as a board chair, I've had that conversation, like, you know, I bet you're not aware of this, but imagine if you were an insecure new board member that hasn't been with this organization for 5 years, and a really seasoned board member while you were talking is doing this and going like that. How would you feel? Can just be I think a lot of people really are not aware of the power of their nonverbal communication. Between meetings, meta issues manifest between meetings. We have discussed this. Let's see if there's anything more to say. bring shadow issues decision forward. We discuss that. Put them on the agenda. If you have board meetings who are complaining, who are talking about issues in between board meetings or having kind of shadow board meetings, the thing to do is to bring it into the sunlight, have a conversation. If it's appropriate, put it on the agenda. It's amazing if you say, well, why don't we put that on the board agenda? And then half the time they'll say, oh, I don't think we need to do that. Because it's more of a bone to pick, an axe to grind. But the theme here is to deal with it. And again, a kitchen table board, a board that's been used to lack of formality, tends to deal with things outside of board meetings and in a very casual way. Not good for a larger board that's more structured. And then sometimes the board chair or the vice chair or a board officer, you may need to deal with one or more board members one-on-one. And it's really important to do that because shadow issues can just poison a board. A real decision-making process, we've talked about that. And zero tolerance for gossip. I have an organization where that is in their culture statement. It's handed out with an application to potential board members. And if gossip happens, it is dealt with really swiftly. With a question of what's underneath this gossip. Is there an issue that the gossip is covering over that is legitimate and needs to be dealt with? So zero tolerance for gossip. Find out if it's a sport or if it's covering up something real. You can.
To what extent can the ED, is it appropriate for the ED to try to influence the board culture? In other words, I mean, if they have a conversation, maybe suggesting having a conversation at a board meeting about what kind of culture board members want to have. What if there's something that an executive director thinks is appropriate to suggest? I mean, is it
Mm-hmm.
awkward to the board member to talk about it in front of the board if they would like to see the board move into the direction where it's
Uh-huh.
kind of conversation with the board chair?
So how ED should make suggestions influence the board's culture? I think it depends on what it is. I think by and large, when I've done culture exercises with boards, the EDs are usually there and participate and have really important input. If it's something charged, then you might want to work through a board member. But I think by and large, it's a much more interesting, relevant, dynamic process if the ED CEO is part of it, and they often will make suggestions that that board members just don't think of. Okay, so I think there's nothing new here. Board chairs. I hope you're going to be having more conversations and communication in a supportive way with board members who need help understanding their role, participating as a board member productively and effectively. There are very few board members that I've worked with who really are evil, who have their own agenda and who want to impose it on the organization. Sometimes board members are really opinionated, and their opinion needs a home. And if it doesn't find a home and it's a strong board member, they're going to hijack board meetings. They're going to try and make shadow decisions. So board chairs and board leadership needs to be ready at board meetings to notice when something's happening kind of subterranean and say, you know what, I think we need to stop because I'm sensing there's an issue or conflict here. Here's what I think is happening. Let's take a few moments to deal with it. And executive directors, you have your ear to the ground. So strong leadership from EDs, board chairs, board leadership is essential to support and help and lead an organization to move to, or a board to move to be the board that an organization needs. So you are working together to help the board look at what stage it's in, whether it's conscious of the governance support role, and then developing an action plan. Brooke, you look like you have another question. No. Okay. Okay. And you need an active executive committee and governance committee. I want to apologize again because this really is an overview. I could give a week's training on this. I wanted to see if there are any burning questions. Anything from our online folks? No? Let's go to this side of the room. Yes? I think, oh, right. What about an executive director who's also a board member? I personally don't agree with that structure. It's common among some groups. I think that it's an imbalanced power dynamic, and I think that the ED, even as an ex officio, is weighing in as a board member on staff business and organization business that is really a board governance role. I think often EDs want to be a board member when they feel disempowered and when there are other issues that need to be dealt with in another way. Yes?
My question is about the stage transition where you have the payroll
Uh-huh.
where the EDs kind of running the show and how that transition occurs.
Boy, is that fun. That is really hard. That is really hard. Sometimes founders end up leaving. Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, it's a new thing. I keep forgetting. So the question is, what about when you have a founding ED and the board needs to move to a governance stage, and the ED needs to let go, actually, and let the board support the board in becoming empowered. Some founding EDs can do that, and it takes support, oftentimes coaching, also clarity and intentionality. What's their role been, and what does it need to be? What has the relationship with the board been, and what does it need to be to support a governing governance board? A lot of times EDs end up leaving because it's too hard a change, and oftentimes a middle stage nonprofit needs a different kind of leadership than a founding ED, but it is a very hard transition. I only know of a few organizations where a founding ED has actually left and shifted their role independently. Usually it's because of some kind of issue or crisis where that change happens. Yes?
I would imagine in the ideal world that the board buying into some of this like cultural analysis of their stage, but in reality, probably like one of them is pushing it, the board chair or one of the stronger members. I mean, how often in your experience are there kind of some dissenting people that don't want to do it?
There's always some dissent. Oh, how often when boards are needing to move their stage, looking at their culture, is there a minority of board members who actually want to make that change? Usually by the time they call me in, many of the board members know that change needs to happen. There are always some people who don't want things to change because it's more comfortable, they don't have to work as hard, they have more perceived power. And the truth is there's various ways of working with them. Some of them leave and some of them grow. And if they don't want to be part of a governance board, then they do need to leave and hopefully find a different role with the organization. Yes?
So if you are now looking to transition, and you're looking to go outside the process.
Oh, can you, I'll just repeat, Janet. Okay. Okay, so yeah?
So just what would be your recommendations as where to start this recruitment process
With new board members?
outside the room?
I would start, I'm assuming, your board is kind of insular and people recruit friends and people they know. I would start with looking at your volunteers and donors. Donors make fantastic board members because they're already committed. Oftentimes they're volunteers as well. There's Board Match. There is Board Plus. There's the Volunteer Center, which actually matches board members with organizations. As I mentioned earlier, you might look for people who are networked and form a recruitment committee that includes people like that. So they're not going to join your board, but they're going to provide names. So I want to invite you to do a little exercise. There is a worksheet at the end of your packet, and I'd like you to just take a look at it and just determine where your board is in terms of its stage. And then I did a little quiz on the board's awareness of its governance support role. And I will reveal the answers in a moment. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to take a look at your board, kind of apply this framework, and start thinking about what would next steps be. And that's page 4, 5, and 5 in your packet. Here's the key to the governance and support worksheet. I do. God, whoops. So number 9 is yes. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'm going to just jump ahead. Here's how the scores add up. So I'd like to know, just raise your hands, those of you who have an answer. If you were going to take 2 action steps starting tomorrow to start moving your board to the board you need, what would they be? Anyone have any in mind? Yes. Job descriptions. Very good. Start with the basics. Anyone else? Yes, Karen. I think I said I have examples in a worksheet for that, so if you want it, just email me. Yes, Brooke, what are you going to do? What kind of culture? Anyone else? Immediate next steps you're going to, yes? Share your handout. Oh, very good. You get an A+. Someone over there? Yes. Recruit more rigorously. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So bring in someone neutral to work on board housekeeping that some board members might not be happy about. Okay, anyone else? Next steps you're going to do, put into place? Okay, I sense that you want happy hour. So just a few. You can see on your bibliography, there's some of, I think, the best books on board development available. Nonprofit Boards That Work is one of my absolute favorites. Yes?
Can you put back a slide to the correct answer?
Yes.
I was gonna ask the same thing. I didn't get to score.
And remember, 9 should be yes.
All right.
And I just want to especially direct your attention immediately under websites and articles is the full article on the stages of board development, which I really suggest you read. It's a page turner, folks. What can I say?
Lisa?
Yes. It's in your bibliography. It is the article immediately under websites and articles. Yes.
Do you have any suggestions either for books or articles about the board or the staff dealing with members to let them know, to help them understand why, what the role?
Oh, gosh, yes. There is, in Nonprofit Boards That Work, there's a fantastic section on the ED board relationship, and it actually really, in a very practical way, kind of exemplifies the board's role and responsibilities and how it works in the trenches, working with EDs. Yes?
I mean, we've been discussing the working together between the ED and the board.
Yes.
The board functions and the ED functions.
Right.
What about that, those two entities together facing the members or the volunteers or whatever, the people who don't maybe understand what that work is all about and don't really value it in the way that they might do otherwise?
You know what? Let's talk after the session.
Lisa?
Few more things. I am giving a workshop for board chairs and committee chairs called Fearless Facilitation for board chairs and committee chairs, kind of a follow-up to this session. And it is on April 6th here at the Foundation Center, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. It will be fun. And I just told Janet I want to do a follow-up to this session that I'm going to call high-performing boards. So once you've got the basics in terms of board development, what does it mean to be a high-performing board? What does it mean to be productive and effective? But let's get the board in the right stage first, clear on their role, do your housekeeping, and we'll see you soon for high-performing boards. Any burning questions?
One, Lisa?
Yeah.
Was the Jan Masoka book that you were talking about earlier Nonprofit Sustainability or the Nonprofit's Guide to Human Resources?
The Nonprofit's Guide to Human Resources. Tell them I said thank you. That's the book that has excellent evaluation tools for the ED. The Nonprofit's Guide to Human Resources by Jan Masoka. It is excellent. Anyone else? There's time for, yeah.
So I love the idea of the round robin, but I could imagine with our board that some people might not love being put on the spot. Do you have any strategies?
I do. I like to do write and round robin. So give people a couple of moments to write down their thoughts and let people know that they can pass. And then remember after the round to say, would anyone who likes to pass talk now? I have really seen it change the dynamic of meetings quite dramatically. Okay, let's go get happy. Thank you very much.